And then as I'm looking at the SPY and the Qs, here, I'll bring them over for you. Look, went back up to this level, this 374, looks like 34 or something, topped out. And then we've been putting in lower lows and lower highs, bearish pattern. I want to see that bearish pattern continue. But then when we get down to this 372.53 is going to be the real test. I want to see the SPY crack that and then ultimately crack the 120 and then head lower. That'll validate. And then I'll show you the Qs. Kind of the same thing. Topped out up here, and then we're putting in lower lows, bearish. Looks like the Q wants to crack it. The Qs want to crack this level. Let's see if we can actually have some follow through on the crack. And again, the Qs, you know, have more tech. It's more weighted with tech stocks, I believe. And all right, so we cracked that level. Now I want to see us crack the 120. And then let me show you Apple. Look at Apple. Same thing. But it was basing here, and then it's started putting in lower lows. That's indecision, but a lower low, and then stepping down, lower low, and kind of rejected off the 9. I want to see some follow through, because see right now it's like bouncing. See, it's trying to bounce. Now I want to see a rejection off the 9 EMA and head lower, and then a rejection and a crack of the 120. So again, now we got the Qs here at this 273.90s handle, trying to base and then bounce and not crack. But I do see a wick on the top rejecting off that level, and also the SPY is trying to break down this level. A wick on the top is trying to reject, hasn't rejected yet. I want to see it reject. And then if you look at NVIDIA, kind of basically the same thing. Wick on the top was weak, bearish, but look, we're under VWAP, the 9 and the 10, right? Cracked down here to the 120 and then bounced. Well, actually cracked it, and then based underneath it was able to reclaim it. And remember, the 120 for me anyways acts as a long-term directional indicator, long-term directional moving average. So if we're above the 120, I'm feeling like we're still kind of bullish on a higher time frame. We did bounce back up, reject off the 9, and just put in lower lows and then indecision. But because we're rejecting off the 9 and the 10 bearish, then a nice rejection with follow through past the 120. And now this next candle opened below this one. So lower lows, lower highs. And then look at the wick, rejection off the 120. So that's all looking good for a bearish thesis to the downside. So let's just go ahead and observe this price action. Now, the Qs right now are down to the 120-day SMA, my long-term directional. But it's trying to kind of catch a bounce there. But what I want to see is the Qs crack the 120. Because once the Qs crack the 120, and being that the Qs, that index is more heavily weighted with tech stocks, I want to see that crack the 120. That would signify that now we are entering the longer term trend is bearish. And because I'm watching AMD and NVIDIA, you know, obviously those are tech stocks. Those are semiconductors. So the Qs cracking the 120-day would be another elevating factor for me and my thesis towards the downside, which is the logical thesis. But again, nothing's logical here. Too much hopium in this market. And then look at NVIDIA. So, I mean, this is what you want to see if you have the thesis and the logical thesis. Ran up, rejected. We filled in that gap up from pre-market or after hours, whatever it was. But now you see NVIDIA way under VWAP, the 9, the 10, and the 120. So we'd like to see this continue to head lower and crack this red to green line and drag AMD down with it, along with the Qs. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my charts here. Too many levels. All right, so the Qs right now, again, it's still basing on the 120, but it's trying to crack. Let me show you. See? It's trying to base in, but it's cracking it. Looks like seeing some. Well, that again, this is the tape for AMD, but it's cracking. Cracked it. Now next candle opened below the 120. We don't want to see a bounce right here. We want to see a rejection off the 120 and head lower. See that wick rejecting off the 120? We want to see more follow through with that. See those red prints? But that's AMD. Get this out the way. Okay, so now the Qs are still right up underneath the 120, but it's wicking off the 120 to the downside, which shows me it's weak. And then the SPY, look at that. Ever since that 374 level, just been putting in lower lows and lower highs. Just lower lows, lower highs. Bearish pattern. Now, the ultimate validation of my thesis would be for the SPY to do the same thing the Qs did, which is come down here to the 120, crack that 120, and confirm that the overall market is now back in a downtrend. That's what we want to see.